The frequency below the Earth. The Earth does not think of us. This is the first thing they teach you in geophysics, and one of the few things Mara Voss had found consistently useful across a 30-year career. The planet is not hostile. It is not indifferent in the way a person is indifferent. It simply does not operate at a scale where we register. She had spent her career finding this comforting. She thought about it sometimes, in the particular way you think about things that have been load-bearing beliefs for a long time. Carefully, the way you test a step before trusting your weight to it. She thought about it a great deal in the 18 months she spent at the Koivula Deep Monitoring Station, 3 kilometers below the surface of the Finnish bedrock, listening to sounds that should not have been there. The station was a repurposed section of an old nickel mine. The original shafts had gone deeper than any active extraction warranted, following a geological anomaly that the mining company's geologists had eventually abandoned as unprofitable and handed over to a consortium of universities. The anomaly itself, a zone of unusual acoustic properties in the lower crust, approximately 6 kilometers down, had been studied intermittently for 20 years without producing anything conclusive. Mara had been sent to produce something conclusive. Her equipment was newer than anything the previous teams had used. The seismometers she deployed could detect ground motion at sensitivities that would have seemed implausible a decade earlier. The passage of a truck on a road 40 kilometers distant. The footfall of a person in the corridor above. She arrayed them in a grid across the deepest accessible level of the station and spent the first 3 months collecting baseline data, cataloging the ordinary sounds of the deep earth, thermal convection, fluid migration through fault zones, the long, slow creak of rock adjusting to pressure gradients measured in millions of years. The anomaly manifested in her data on the 94th day. She very nearly missed it. What she saw was a low-frequency signal, consistent in amplitude, appearing at irregular but patterned intervals in the data from 3 of her deepest sensors. At first, she assumed it was interference, resonance from the ventilation system, or a harmonic artifact from the elevator machinery. She checked both. Neither was the source. She examined the data more carefully and found that the pattern extended back, faintly, into the archive records from the previous monitoring teams. Not far enough to determine origin, far enough to establish that whatever was producing it, it was not new. She annotated the finding, gave it a project code, VH7, for Voss harmonic 7th notation, and continued collecting data. She was methodical. She had always been methodical. It was the quality that had gotten her this posting, and the quality that would eventually make it very difficult for her to dismiss what the data was telling her. VH7 was organized. This was not the word she used in her initial reports. In her initial reports, she used phrases like statistically non-random interval distribution and frequency coherence inconsistent with known geological sources. These phrases said the same thing in a register that would not alarm the consortium reviewers. Mara had 28 years of experience in academic science and understood which findings could be stated plainly and which needed to be wrapped in enough technical hedging to let readers arrive at their own alarm in their own time. Privately, in the notebook she kept in handwriting, so compressed it was almost illegible to anyone but herself, she wrote, "It has a rhythm, not a mechanical rhythm, not the regularity of something built, the rhythm of something alive. tidal, like breathing. She did not believe she was recording a living thing. She needed to be clear about this with herself. She was a geophysicist, and the Earth's lithosphere was not alive in any sense that her training had equipped her to recognize. What she believed was that she was recording a phenomenon she didn't have the right framework for yet. This was different. Scientists found things they didn't have frameworks for all the time. The frameworks caught up. She did not know then that this framework wasn't going to catch up. By the 6th month, she had enough data to make a preliminary characterization of the source. It was located below the Moho discontinuity, below the base of the crust, which was unexpected and probably impossible if you held strictly to the standard model of what sat below the Moho. The signal propagated upward through the crust in a way that suggested extreme coherence at the source. It had not spread or attenuated the way a geological disturbance should over that distance. Something below the crust was producing organized oscillations and maintaining that organization through 6 kilometers of granite. She sent this finding to her consortium contact with careful hedging. The consortium contact replied that it was very interesting and asked her to continue data collection. She had the sense, reading the email, that he had not fully registered what she was describing. This was not surprising. She was still not sure she had fully registered it herself. What she did next was not in the project protocol. She spent a week designing a transducer array that could, in theory, produce a signal in the same frequency range as VH7. Not a powerful signal, nothing that would disturb the rock or interfere with her measurements, just a small organized pulse at the right frequencies, produced for a duration of 30 seconds, and then silence to see what the data showed afterward. She ran the experiment on a Tuesday afternoon in December, alone in the monitoring chamber, in the fluorescent quiet of the deep station, where the only sounds were the hum of the equipment and the distant drip of groundwater somewhere in the older shafts. She produced her 30-second pulse. She let the silence settle. She looked at the data. For 6 minutes, nothing changed. Then VH7 altered. Not dramatically. The interval structure shifted, briefly, in a way that her analysis software flagged as statistically significant. The amplitude increased by a small and precise amount. And then, over the following 4 minutes, it returned to its previous pattern. The same rhythm it had maintained, as far as she could determine, for as long as any instrument had been in this mine. She ran the experiment again the following day. The same result. Then again. The response was consistent. Her pulse, directed downward, produced a change in VH7 that lasted approximately 10 minutes before the signal settled back to baseline. The change was not random. It was, her analysis suggested, ordered. A specific modification of the interval structure that she had begun to suspect was not an echo, but a reply. She was very careful. In her notebook, with the word reply. She wrote it and then sat looking at it for a long time. She thought about her career. She thought about the framework scientists use and what happens when you are the one who has to propose a new one. She thought about the 30-year consensus on what lay below the moho and the specific texture of professional embarrassment that awaited anyone who seriously suggested that consensus might be incomplete in the way she was now privately considering. She kept the experiment data separate from her official reporting. The winter in Finland was long and dark in ways she had prepared for academically and was not fully prepared for in practice. The station had artificial lighting calibrated to support a functional circadian rhythm, and she used it diligently. And still the awareness of the kilometers of rock above her became, in January and February, something she had to consciously manage. She was not claustrophobic. She had done fieldwork in mines before. But there was something about Koivala specifically that the darkness underscored. The sense that she was very small in a very large thing, and the large thing was not unaware of her. This was not a rational thought. She knew this. She cataloged it the way she cataloged everything, in her compressed handwriting, with a date and the note. Probably a psychological response to isolation and depth and the nature of the work. Do not overweight. She did not overweight it. But she did not throw it out either, because she was a careful observer, and it seemed relevant that a thought she had always considered obviously irrational, the earth being in some sense aware of what moved across it, had become, in the context of her data, less obviously irrational than she would have liked. She designed a more complex experiment in March. Not a single pulse this time, a sequence. She had spent 6 weeks analyzing the interval structure of VH7 and had identified what she believed was a recursive pattern. The signal was not simply rhythmic, but self-referential in a mathematical sense, earlier intervals encoding information about later ones. She designed a pulse sequence that responded to this structure, not mimicking the signal, but answering it in its own terms, the way you might complete a phrase in a language you were beginning to understand. She ran the experiment at 3 a.m. because she worked better at night, and because there was something appropriate, she thought, about conducting this particular conversation in the deepest hours. She produced her sequence over the course of 2 minutes. She watched the sensors. She waited. For 11 minutes, nothing changed. She had begun to think the experiment had failed, which would have been disappointing and also a relief, when VH7 changed in a way that her software had no framework for representing. The signal did not simply alter its interval structure. It altered its frequency range. It moved, over the course of 30 seconds, into a band that her sensors could barely capture, at the edge of what she had designed them to detect. And then it moved back. Within that 30 seconds, her sensors had recorded something that her analysis returned as a complex waveform of a type she had not encountered in the literature. Not geological, not mechanical, not natural, in any category of natural she had access to. She played it back as audio. This was not standard practice. She did it anyway. What she heard was not a sound she had words for. It occupied the frequency range of very low sound. Subsonic almost, felt as much as heard. And it lasted exactly 30 seconds. In those 30 seconds, she felt, not metaphorically, but as a physical fact, that something was attending to her. Not in the way that a person attends to you, in a way that had no human analog, as though the attention itself was a geological force, vast and patient and absolutely indifferent to what she understood, or what she wanted, or what category she needed to put it in. When the 30 seconds ended, she sat in the monitoring chamber for a long time and did not move. She did not cry. She noted later that she thought this was interesting. She filed a report that week. It described the anomaly's behavior in terms that, she calculated, would take the consortium reviewers approximately 2 months to fully process. She needed 2 months. She had more experiments to run, and she needed to run them before anyone came to Koivula to check on her data in person. Because once they came and saw what she had found, the conversation would become institutional. And institutional conversations had their own momentum that she was not ready to surrender to. The spring experiments confirmed everything she had not wanted confirmed. VH7 was responsive. It responded consistently and specifically to her pulse sequences in ways that ruled out mechanical or geophysical explanations at any confidence level she was willing to accept. It had learned her sequences. Over the months of experiment, the response time had shortened from 11 minutes to 4 to 40 seconds, as though whatever was producing the signal had been waiting for her to develop sufficient vocabulary and had been patient while she worked it out. It had been patient in a way that required having been there long enough to develop patience. She tried to calculate how old VH7 was. The archive records went back 20 years. The geological layers through which the signal propagated had been dated by previous teams to approximately 1.8 billion years. This was a lower bound only. She could not determine an upper bound. She understood, in April, what the signal was pointing at. Not in words. She was past expecting words. What she understood was structural, an implication in the mathematics of the pattern, something she could see only because she had spent enough months listening to it that she had begun to think in its terms. The signal was not communicating information. It was not transmitting content. It was doing what a root system does. It was reaching, threading through the rock, propagating upward, finding whatever in the world above was organized enough to respond. And she had responded. She had, over the course of 18 months, made herself the most organized thing in the mine. She had, with her instruments and her experiments and her careful handwriting, built herself into a shape that something below the moho could locate. She thought about whether she should have done that. She wrote in her notebook, "I have been thinking about what geological time means for consciousness. The bedrock of Finland is among the oldest exposed rock on the surface of the Earth. Something that began 3 kilometers below it, 1.8 billion years ago, would have existed before multicellular life, before the Cambrian, before eyes. Whatever is down there has been in the dark, longer than anything that lives in light has existed. I keep trying to imagine what that does to a thing. I keep running out of imagination. I keep running the experiments. I am not able to stop running the experiments. This is not a rational observation about my own behavior, but I am cataloging it anyway, because I believe in cataloging things, even when they are inconvenient." The consortium reviewers came in June. They were 3 of them, senior researchers from 3 of the partner universities, and they were interested and careful and asked excellent questions. She showed them the official data. She explained VH7. She did not show them the experiment logs. One of them, a seismologist from Oslo named Eirik, spent a long time looking at the sensor array before asking her how long she had been down here alone. She told him 18 months. He said that was a long time, and she said yes. He said the consortium had been planning to rotate in a second researcher, and she said that sounded reasonable. He said she seemed very focused, and she said she was. He asked her, on the last evening before they left, whether she had formed any personal theories about the source of the anomaly. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the 30 seconds of audio she had played back in March. She thought about the words she had been carefully not using in her official reports for 6 months. She said, "I think we may be looking at a phenomenon that requires a new framework." This was true. He nodded and said that was why they had sent her. She smiled and said yes. He left the next morning with the others, and she was alone in Koivula again, in the fluorescent hum of the deep station, with 3 kilometers of ancient rock between her and the sky. She went back down to the monitoring chamber that night and ran the most complex sequence she had yet designed. 3 months in the making. Encoded with the structural logic she had abstracted from VH7's own recursive pattern. A sequence that said, in the only terms available, "I understand what you are doing. I understand what I am. I am here." The response came in 40 seconds. It lasted 4 minutes. Her sensors could not fully capture it. The audio playback afterward was the longest she had yet heard. A low resonance that filled the chamber in a way that made the walls feel like the inside of something rather than the outside of something. A sound that was patient and ancient and absolutely present in a way that had no quality of warmth or welcome, that simply was, the way the bedrock was, the way the darkness was, the way the billion years of silence before anyone asked any questions was. She did not move for a long time after it ended. She wrote, finally, in the notebook, "I said I'm here. Whatever is below the moho said, not in words, there are no words for this direction. It said, I know. I have always known. I have been here longer than the knowing of things, and I will be here after the last knowing is gone. What you are is a brief organization of matter, and I have been watching brief organizations since before your kind of matter existed. You are the first to answer. I find this neither significant nor insignificant. I find it the way I find everything, at the speed of stone." She filed the notebook in a waterproof case behind a ventilation panel in the monitoring chamber. The second researcher arrived in August, a doctoral student, enthusiastic and careful, full of good questions about the sensor array. She showed him the data. She explained VH7. He was very interested. She watched him examine the spectrogram and waited to see if he would see what she had seen, the evening she had nearly missed it on the 94th day. He did not. His eye slid past it the way eyes slide past things they have no category for. She thought about telling him. She thought about what she had been 18 months ago. Careful, methodical, load-bearing, certain that the earth did not think of them. She did not think she could give someone that certainty back. Once she had removed it, she was not sure it was hers to remove. She taught him the equipment. She gave him a copy of her official reports. She showed him everything she was able to show him, which was most of what she knew and none of what she understood. The thing below the moho continued its rhythm, patient and immense and pointed, the way everything ancient is pointed at whatever is long enough in one place to become worth pointing at. Mara Voss returned to her university in September. She submitted her final report, which was well received. She gave a talk at a conference in Helsinki about the acoustic properties of the lower crust and was asked many excellent questions that she answered carefully and accurately. She is considered, by everyone in her field, to be among the most rigorous observers of her generation. She does not play the audio recordings. She does not need to. She can hear it, not the signal, not literally, but the quality of attention it produced, the sense of being located by something that has been in the dark since before there was anything to find. This does not leave. She has come to understand that it is not going to leave. The monitoring station at Koivula is still operational. The new research team is producing excellent data. VH7 continues, in their records, to appear as an anomaly of uncertain origin. Responsive, they note, to certain organized acoustic inputs, but in ways they have not yet been able to characterize. They are starting to design experiments. Below the moho, below the base of everything built and named and given history. In the dark that preceded all description of darkness, something waits. It is not waiting the way a creature waits, with want, with hunger, with the experience of duration. It waits the way the rock waits. It waits the way a billion years waits, which is to say, it does not experience the waiting at all. But when something organized and brief and full of questions descends close enough, it notices. It always notices. The Koivula Deep Monitoring Station remains active. Researchers continue to study the anomaly, designated VH7, which has been independently confirmed by 3 subsequent monitoring teams. The experiment logs from Dr. Voss's deployment have never been published. A waterproof case was found behind a ventilation panel during a 2028 equipment upgrade. Its contents were reviewed by one person, who filed it under restricted materials and has not referenced it since. The signal is still there. At this moment, 3 kilometers below the Finnish bedrock, something is producing organized oscillations in the lower crust that have no geological explanation. It has been doing this for longer than anything that can ask questions has existed. Thank you for listening to Storytime Scary Dark. The Earth is very old and very quiet, and it is very full of things we have not yet learned to hear. Follow the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.